Hey guys, welcome back. A couple years ago I made a video on the top 10 weakest abilities in League of Legends, and it was definitely entertaining to make and talk about, especially with the amount of discussion the video brought up. I figured it would be worth making a part 2 considering there's still a wide number of abilities in the game that fail to measure up to the rest of a champion's kit. I understand that champions are balanced in a holistic fashion, so even if they might have a quote-unquote weak or useless ability, they probably get more strength and power added to another part of their kit. Even so, a measurable number of champions has something in their kit that's either relatively or straight up objectively underwhelming. In some cases, that ability straight up doesn't do anything at all except explain a certain mechanic of the champion. Whatever the case may be, I'd like to go through 10 more of the worst abilities in League of Legends. It's going to be another heavily opinionated video, as always, so you're welcome to argue for or against my choices in the comments down below. Alrighty, ability number 1. Rakan's known to be a very skill-expressive champion with a powerful engage as well as some defensive utility in that he can shield and heal his team. While his engage might not be quite as overwhelming as say a Rel or Nautilus, nor can he peel or buff as efficiently as a dedicated enchanter, having the option to do one or the other makes him a fairly consistent pick. But one ability that, based on my observation, Rakan players have always complained about was Gleaming Quill, because it doesn't really do the best job playing into either of his playstyles. It's a projectile that damages the first enemy struck, and if it hits a champion, Rakan gets a delayed AoE heal that activates instantly if he gets near an allied champion. For the longest time ever, his Q was bad. When he first came out in 2017, his Q did practically 0 damage, and the healing was equally non-existent. They did make efforts to buff the healing over the years, but hardly anyone ever notices either the damage or healing of his Q for the sheer fact that it's just so mediocre at both. I understand giving a jack of all trades anything stronger than this would make him overpowered, but Gleaming Quill could easily be implemented in a different way to make it more satisfying to use. Objectively, it does have a purpose, so for some of you, calling it one of the worst abilities in the game might be a stretch, but I wouldn't be surprised if people forgot what his Q even was. Compared to Grand Entrance, Battle Dance, and the Quickness, Gleaming Quill is not only underwhelming, but kind of asynchronous with the rest of his kit. Alright, call me biased if you will, being a Renekton co-main, but I'm not a fan of passive abilities that do nothing but explain what the champion does, especially when there are similar passives with an actual purpose to them. To be clear, there are plenty of champions who suffer from this, not just Renekton. Pantheon, Zyra, and Fiddlesticks, to name a few, also have basically no passive, at least not one that could easily be replicated within one of their other abilities and or include something else. For brevity's sake, we'll just talk about Renektons. Reign of Vanguard. All it serves to do is tell you that Renekton has a Fury mechanic instead of mana, and at half HP or less, he generates 1.5 times more Fury. That's it. In a vacuum, I don't have an issue with something like this, especially if the champion is balanced around not having a passive. In Renekton's case, people don't complain about not having a meaningful passive, but let me show you the other Fury champions in League and tell me what you notice. Tryndamere also builds up Fury when dealing damage, and he gains bonus crit chance based on his Fury. Rek'Sai builds up Fury when dealing damage as well, and she consumes it to regenerate HP while burrowed. Nara builds up Rage, aka Fury, while attacking, and at max Rage she turns into a giant kaiju that blows everything up. I know what you're gonna say, Renekton's passive does have a purpose in that it serves to empower his basic abilities, but to me, it feels incredibly lazy to have a passive without something on its own, especially when other champions have a similar description-based passive, but it actually gives something too. In my opinion, every champion with a type of passive like this should have something included within it. Actually, I do want to bring up another example of a useless passive because in Zyra's case, she actually had one before they took it away. Not a great passive, mind you, but it was better than having none whatsoever. Garden of Thorns. Every so often, Zyra spawns a random seed nearby that she can interact with in order to spawn her plants. That's it. That is literally it. You might say there's a purpose to her passive and that without it, she would lose a core part of her identity being to summon plants that can attack. That would be a good point if Rampant Growth didn't also exist. Rampant Growth essentially enables her to plant seeds on demand, giving Zyra some agency in having on-demand ammo instead of relying on random generation. You could easily take Garden of Thorns and make it a passive for Zyra's W, with the stipulation that the passive part is in play even at level 1. For those who don't know what her old passive was, Zyra used to have a death passive, and unlike Kog'Maw's, hers was a bit more threatening. Rise of the Thorns. Upon taking fatal damage for the next 8 seconds, Zyra would turn into a ballista and basically gain access to a single Vars Q, a piercing arrow that would do true damage to all enemies in line of sight. This, in my opinion, was a way more interactive Zyra passive because 1. Unlike Kog'Maw, where the AoE was extremely small, Zyra's attack range was pretty far, and 2. Between 2 to 8 seconds you could cast it whenever you wanted, whereas Kog'Maw's passive had a set time for it to detonate. Against him, you could time flash or whatever mobility you had to get out of the way just in time. On the other hand, Zyra could pressure the enemy team by deliberately holding on to her death passive attack, forcing them to continue being wary of her even after they killed her. I don't see why they couldn't maintain her old passive and just change Rampant Growth to include her current passive. Again, I know she's bounced around it, but I'd wager every Zyra player would agree with the idea to bring back her old one. This one's gonna be an extreme hot take, but hear me out. Xerath's passive Mana Surge. In its defense, Mana Surge is a passive many mid laners would kill to have. It affords you basically infinite ability usage with the caveat that you're able to basic attack something. It presents an interesting incentive for Xerath, an artillery mage who very much would rather be far the hell away from the enemy team, who still wants to be decently up close or at least be able to auto-attack them for more juice. However, the usefulness of Mana Surge diminishes considerably once you buy Lost Chapter, and it continues to diminish in value the later the game goes. The vast majority of mages don't struggle with mana after buying the 600 mana item. Even for someone with exorbitant mana costs like Xerath, he can get by with that Mana Surge once he completes Ludens or Blackfire Torch. Furthermore, when you consider how much more easily jungle buffs have become to obtain, both in that all junglers can now impart a copy of blue or red buff to one of their allies if their jungle item is halfway completed, not just Ivern, and then of course after Baron spawns, in which taking out blue or red buff grants a copy of it to the entire team. By mid-game, Xerath basically has no passive, not because it doesn't exist, but because typically Xerath will have infinite mana by that point. Incidentally, there was another champion with a similar mana sustain mechanic as Xerath, Lissandra, before getting her current passive in 8.23 turning her into one of the best teamfight mages in the game. Lissandra had Iceborne, periodically giving her a free ability cast. To address her not having any mana sustain, they made the simple choice to lower the mana cost of her Q and W, very easy fix, but it made her way more imposing of a champion overall. Xerath could easily be rebalanced around getting a new, more interactive passive and then just lower his mana costs and perhaps base damage in order to not make him feel too oppressive in the early game. Again, Mana Surge isn't a bad ability, but over the years it went from a necessary part of his kit to a part you basically forget about halfway through the game. Okay, I'm sure no one was expecting Yuumi of all champions to be on the list considering she was easily one of the most obnoxious champions of all time, but after she got reworked, I feel like one part of her kit that went from pretty good to complete ass is her passive, Feline Friendship. I know we're talking about a lot of passives, but this one's for a different reason than the others in that it has two problems. First and foremost, it's kind of reminiscent of Rakan's Gleaming Quill, wherein Yuumi gets to heal herself for a small chunk every so often, and if she attaches herself to an allied champion, they also get healed by this effect. I should point out that Final Chapter can trigger this as well, but in short, it's a periodic heal that could also juice up a friendly. What's wrong with this ability? It's that it doesn't really do a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, especially when you compare it to how overpowered Yuumi's sustain was in her past iteration. Even comparing her old passive, I would argue it was a lot better. Mana sustain for herself and a fairly notable shield to go along with it that she can pass on to her teammate. The shield holds out indefinitely until it gets broken. Pop and block give you a worthwhile incentive to detach and attack an enemy champion, whereas I don't think the same is really there for Feline Friendship. Speaking of friendship, I also consider it to be really bad. It effectively forces Yuumi to join up with only one champion for the entirety of the game, making her significantly weaker on her other teammates. It is actually crazy how much of a difference it makes. Yuumi can restore mana, give them sustain on hit, guarantee an empowered slow, and offer a significantly greater healing with her ultimate. Honestly, this is more of a badly designed ability than a practically weak one, but generally speaking, yeah, I'd say Feline Friendship is an underwhelming passive more often than not. Alright, we can finally talk about a non-passive ability, and Zap, if you're watching this, please don't kill me. I actually think Tectonic Disruption, Vel'Koz's E, is one of the worst active abilities in the game, which might confuse a lot of you on account of it being a ranged AoE knockup that does serve a purpose on Vel'Koz. In this instance, however, it's more that everyone else's crowd control utility is just so much better. 4 things are wrong with this attack. 1, it does almost no damage, like actually 0 damage. 30% AP scaling, even for a champion with all 5 abilities doing damage, is pretty lousy. 2, the cast range, max reach of 800 is terrible for an artillery mage, that's close enough to get gap closed on. 3, it's one of the most avoidable crowd controls in the game. At full distance, it has a cast time of nearly a second, and when adding how small the effect radius is, you can dash, flash, or even walk out of it on reaction. 4, even if you land it, it's only a 3/4 second knockup. AoE knockup, yes, but setup tools on other mages are consistently easier to land and have more impact on average, both in mid lane and support. Nico Tangle Barbs, more damage, faster speed, more range, easier to land, far longer lockdown duration, etc. Xerath hits only one target but significantly longer range and way longer stun duration even without hitting max distance. Lux Binding hits only 2 targets but it's a 2-second route, much higher damage, and longer range. I don't think I'm alone in saying Vel'Koz will want to have any other setup tool than Tectonic Disruption because all of them guarantee the full duration of his ultimate. They need to buff Vel'Koz's E. It is needlessly underwhelming. We're back to the passive, but this one I'm sure most people agree with because even though it fits the whole motif of being an anti-mage, I'd be hard-pressed to say it's all that impactful. Kassadin's passive Voidstone. He's permanently ghosted and takes 10% reduced magic damage. Void Stone's one of the most irrelevant passives in the game. Even the shield on his Q does a better job at mitigating AP champions than his passive. I get that making it any higher than 10% turns it from a useless ability into a problem, but at 10%, unless the enemy team is like 4 magic damage, you're really not seeing much value out of his passive. Against a majority physical damage team, then you practically don't have one at all. Void Stone faces an interesting problem where its value can be best seen during the late game when damage begins to ramp up, but in the late game, everyone starts buying magic penetration or has enough DPS to where taking 10% less damage is kind of a moot point. As a product of the old champion design formula, this is definitely a part that holds Kassadin back. Galio by all accounts is a better anti-mage than Kassadin nowadays. Next we're going to talk about Swain Z, nevermove. It's going to be more or less the same argument as tectonic disruption where fundamentally there is a purpose to it in Swain's kit, and being an AoE crowd control it always carries utility, but the way it's implemented makes it one of the most inconsistent abilities in the game. I kind of went over it in my Swain video where half of his kit excels at long range combat while the other half wants him to fight up close and personal. Unfortunately, the two counterproductively work against each other. Nevermove is a prime example of that. The purpose of his E is to ruin enemies to then pull them closer to him so he can permastack HP and ideally keep them close to him during ultimate. A long range AoE route for 1.5 seconds comes off a lot better than Vel'Koz E, but the fact that nevermove only activates when coming back is what ruins its practicality. The way to make it easier to land is by going at max distance. Up close, the enemy champion has so much time to react to it and step to the side before it comes back. You can also straight up avoid it altogether by walking past Swain if you're in melee range. Personally, I think the old version of nevermove was miles better. It was basically identical to tectonic disruption, but instead of a knockup, it was a 2-second route. That one would be way easier to land than the current version. Although, mind you, I am kind of biased. I enjoyed the old Swain a lot more. Can't seem to stop talking about passive abilities, but we have one more. Thresh's damnation. Players don't often picture Thresh when talking about bad abilities. His Q, W, and E are among the most tactical of their kind. Flying in the face of all of that though is damnation, one of the least impactful infinite scaling abilities in the game. Throughout the course of a match he can pick up souls to gain bonus ability power and armor. Sounds like an overpowered version of Veigar's passive, right? Well, it isn't. To start, Thresh does not gain armor per level. The passive is supposed to do that, so if you fall behind you end up squishier than if you just played a normal champion. In addition, the rate at which you accumulate souls is way worse than that of other infinite scaling metrics. No one panics over a late game Thresh the same way they do a Veigar, Senna, or Smolder. Not even Thresh mains care about stacking souls. Even if you do a good job picking them up, realistically you're not gaining much of an armor lead against the competition since once again, Thresh doesn't gain armor per level, easily the least noticeable thing in his kit. Although to be fair, if it was better, he would be as tanky as a Leona but have way more versatile utility. Last one will be Morgana's W, Tormented Shadow. Morgana in general is a very outdated champion, but W is one of the worst abilities in the game. The only time it's actually a threat is if you go full AP and land Q on a target, in which case yes, it can actually do some very significant damage, but if you don't land Q, it's one of the most irrelevant abilities in the game, really only meant to help you proc your support item and that's about it. Tormented Shadow is definitely a victim of the game's hypermobility meta. Morgana is a victim of hypermobility in general, but even if you were to take the full force of her W, it only starts doing a lot of damage if you're already close to death, at which point anything would kill you. To its credit, it's one of the best jungle clearing tools in the game and the only reason Morgana jungle can even exist. But as a general DPS ability, it's terrible. I feel like Morgana would much rather have something with immediate damage like a Hui QW or a simple blast projectile like Karma Q or something. Black Shield and Dark Binding are the only things keeping Morgana viable in this day and age. If you play mid lane Morgana, then yes, W is a scary ability, but there aren't that many mid lane Morgana players out there, and even then it's intended more for wave clearing than trying to actually kill someone with. Okay, this will definitely piss off a lot of people, but in my defense I did say this was going to be heavily opinionated. Let me know your thoughts on the 10 I chose in the comments down below, whether you agree or disagree with them, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars and join my Discord server, and why not check out my first top 10 worst abilities in League if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.